George Washington failed upward into becoming the first president of the United States. When his career as a powerful person in the military began, he had no other qualifications beyond being a tall, well-connected white man. In fact, he was so incompetent initially that he arguably single-handedly started a war, or at least single-handedly escalated existing tensions disastrously. No joke, here's the tea. Back in the 1750s, the British and the French both wanted to claim Ohio, and the indigenous people had just gotten to the point where they would settle with being on the side of whoever won the dispute between them. The governor of Virginia found out that the French were moving in on the Ohio Company, and he didn't like that because he owned stock in the Ohio Company. So essentially, he wanted to send somebody to tell the French to back off, and then later to command an army of about 300 men at a fort to keep the French out. So he sends George Washington, a 20-year-old surveyor with no formal education beyond elementary school and no military experience, who speaks absolutely no French, and just really wants to be part of the British Army. But hey, he stands an imposing 6 feet 2 inches tall and has blue eyes. What's the worst that could happen? Well, long story short, a group of French Canadians show up at the fort, and they are there on a peaceful diplomatic mission. But Washington doesn't know that because, again, Washington did not speak any French at all. So he orders his men to attack them and take them all out, and they do so, and as if this wasn't bad enough, he accidentally assassinates a Canadian diplomat in the process. This whole mess, which again was Washington's fault, led to the French declaring war on Britain, and that led to a conflict which we now refer to as the French and Indian War. Just in case you're unaware, most historians agree that the French and Indian War was one of the major factors that led to America's War for Independence. See where this is going? It was summed up very well on Plotting Through the President, so I'm just going to quote Howard here. In a nutshell, George Washington set off a chain of events that started the French and Indian War, which hurt England's economy so much it decided to raise the American colonies' taxes, which led to the Revolutionary War, which was followed by America's independent new government electing none other than George Washington as its leader, and he did it all without ever learning French. Well played, George. Well played. If you don't want to read a whole book on Washington and you just want to read more about that incident, that entry is a breezy and accurate read, and I highly recommend it. There is more tea that I could spill on George, but I feel like this is some of the hottest since it puts a hole in that brilliant military man part of his myth that a lot of people still seem to believe for some reason. Also, he was a bit of a social climbing gold digger. The only reason he was able to move up in society is because he married Martha, who was a wealthy widow who owned lots of land. And yes, he did have false teeth, but they weren't made of wood. They were cadaver teeth. I could go on, but we would be here all day. My main point is you can look at George Washington the same way that you can look at most of the men that we now call the Founding Fathers. Very privileged white men of their day who operated with a lot of cognitive dissonance when it came to thinking about the humanity of people who were not like them. He was a real person, a real man of his time. They all were, not myths, not legends, real people, not fictional characters. You can't just project anything you want onto them. You can't pretend they were perfect, just like you can't pretend that they were a bunch of born-again Christians who wanted to found a Christian nation when they were, in fact, mostly a bunch of post-Enlightenment secular deists, just because you want to justify turning the secular democracy they founded into some kind of Christo-fascist dictatorship. Anyway, if you ran into Washington at some kind of party or social situation, he probably would have struck you as very tall and very quiet, because 6'2" is still tall, but it would have seemed even taller then, and he didn't really like to talk, because of the cadaver teeth.